Hi, it takes a couple of seconds for my computer to be able to switch into presentation mode. So I'm just going to wait for a few seconds until I can switch slides. Great. Hi all, my name is Stephanie Ogden. I'm the director of the water team with CARE's FWS unit. And this is a very brief introduction to water smart agriculture. Just to give you a bit of context for water smart agriculture, you have already seen the video that is an overview of CARE's broader Water Plus work. And so you know that our broader work falls into four broad categories, one of which is water smart agriculture. This fits within our CARE Vision 2030 as part of our right to food, water, and nutrition, and is articulated within the food, water, and nutrition strategy, particularly in one of 8 interrelated change domains, particularly that domain that is increasing women's access to and control of sustainable productive resources, including land and water. I do want to note that Water Smart Agriculture is not a standalone program, but is rather meant to be a component within our broader food security and resilience work. So just as some quick context, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? In short, the vast majority of the world's farmers are small-scale farmers. That is, they farm a very small amount of land. There are a number of constraints on their production, 2 of the biggest of which are access to land and access to water. In order to increase their production and contribute to food security, both for themselves as well as their role in global food production, we need to address those water-related constraints. So part of the guiding question for water smart agriculture is, how do smallholder farmers produce more food with the same amount of water? All of this is happening within the broader context of climate change, and climate change is about water. Too much yields floods, too little droughts, and at the wrong time has implications for crops and harvests. This climate change has broader impacts, but the impact on agricultural production is very clear. So what is water smart agriculture? Water smart agriculture is a term that was coined in the Global Water Initiative program in East Africa, which was a program in Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia that ran from about 2012 to 2015 and really explored access to water for productive use. So water smart agriculture emerged from that program as a term that meant the balance of water use from all available sources that maximizes sustainable, resilient production, with a particular emphasis on small-scale farmers. So essentially, water smart agriculture is a balance is increasing access to multiple water uses to increase and stabilize agricultural production, particularly for those small-scale farmers. Water smart agriculture is a set of recommended practices. So practices such as particular soil and water management practices that increase soil moisture retention, but it's also a broader framework to guide investment in small-scale farmers and rain-fed agricultural systems that includes evidence generation and advocacy to governments to increase that attention and investment around small-scale farmers and those constraints. It's also a push to think beyond traditional sources of water for agriculture. This is a bit of a complex diagram, but what the important takeaway here is that the vast majority of water that cycles through the hydrologic system is not actually found in the kind of traditional surface and groundwater sources that we think of. So rivers and lakes and groundwater, these are all what we call blue water sources. That's again, the traditional surface and groundwater that we might traditionally think of as sources for both domestic as well as for productive uses. So often when we think about water for agriculture, we tend to think about water from those same blue water sources. But the vast majority of water that cycles through the hydrologic cycle is actually stored in soils. So in forests and grasslands, wetlands, and crops, all rainwater stored in the soil. And this is called green water. So part of the purpose of water smart agriculture is to broaden our understanding and thinking about water resources and water availability for agriculture, and move from thinking specifically about blue water and infrastructure related to blue water, and think much more about green water and how we can better maximize the use of moisture stored within the soil as water for agricultural purposes, particularly for small-scale farmers. We at CARE divide water smart agriculture practices roughly into three broad categories. Those are soil smart, rainfall smart, and irrigation smart practices. These are interrelated categories and much more of a spectrum, so there's some overlap, but they're meant to sort of be a typology of these different types of WaSA practices. So soil smart practices are the practices that help enhance the soil's capacity to hold and retain moisture. Rainfall smart practices are a series of practices that enhance infiltration of rainwater, reduce evaporation of that moisture, and also maximize rainfall seasons. So that might include things like early maturing seed varieties that grow and mature in a shorter amount of time to take advantage of shorter rainfall seasons as a result of climate change. Irrigation smart practices are using those blue water sources, the traditional surface and green water, but using them more efficiently to either extend the rainy season beyond where the rainy season traditionally ends, sustain plants during drought or dry spells of a few days or weeks through this enhanced soil moisture and supplemental irrigation, and then also to enhance dry season gardening. So that's often growth at relatively small scale of cash crops during the dry season. There's more to water smart agriculture, but when we think of kind of the types of practices that fall into water smart agriculture, this is kind of a quick typology. And this table is actually taken from our Water Smart Agriculture program in Mali, Malawi, and Ghana, and is kind of a list of some of the practices that those country offices used within each of these categories. So you'll see, for example, under Soil Smart, the use of organic manure and compost as a way to enhance the soil's organic matter and its moisture storage capacity. Likewise, you'll see dry season gardens in small plots under Irrigation Smart. This comes from one of our programs that was working to irrigate very small plots. So this was just a brainstorm among those country programs to sort of list what are some of those practices that we know fall into the water smart agriculture categories. So how would a farmer actually conduct water smart agriculture? What would a farmer do if she were performing or doing water smart agriculture? So this slide is meant to suggest a bit of a sequence. So first, a farmer would invest in soil smart practices. These are the most cost efficient, and they are the ones that have the greatest return to some degree on investment in terms of yields. These, again, are the practices that help to, that ready the soil and enhance its ability to actually hold moisture. So this is kind of a necessary precondition and has big returns. The second is that she'd be rainfall smart. So after enhancing the soil's capacity to hold moisture, she'd also conduct land management practices that help the rainfall to infiltrate more easily, minimize loss to evaporation, And then again, she might plant crops or crop varieties that are early maturing or can be harvested within changing rainfall windows. Finally, she'd be irrigation smart. So when she's already done those other practices, she would invest in efficient and small scale supplemental irrigation that loses little to evaporation. So drip irrigation is a good example of this, but lots of forms of small scale irrigation are pieces of being irrigation smart. Irrigation tends to be costly, both in terms of time and capital costs. So this tends to be a last resort. It's from a cost perspective, the other two, soil smart and rainfall smart practices, are often more easily achievable. And then with some combination of these practices, the goal then would be increased yield with minimal strain on water and land resources. There are other goals, such as being able to sustain harvest through dry spells, for example. But water smart agriculture is more than on-farm practices. It's also about community level practices and landscape approaches, things like watershed conservation and water source protection that have yields on, availability of water more broadly across a community and landscape. It's also about government policy planning and investment in things like integrated water resources management and protection, but also investment in small and medium scale irrigation methods and access. So as an example of this, the government of Uganda has shifted some of its national budget from large scale irrigation infrastructure such as dams to small and medium scale irrigation infrastructure and access for small scale farmers. So recognizing that they couldn't invest solely in large scale irrigation that tends to benefit larger landholders, there's been some shift in investment towards irrigation methods that small scale farmers might access. This also includes, government policy planning and investment in gender equitable access to assets, resources, and services. That includes agricultural extension, that includes technologies and knowledge. So this is to say that water smart agriculture is often thought of as a series of on-farm practices, but in reality is a broader framework that CARE uses to really push thinking about water for agriculture, and particularly how we can increase water availability for small-scale farmers. Finally, just to leave you with a program example, this is from the Water Smart Agriculture Program in Mali, Malawi, and Ghana, which ended just 2 years ago. And this table, again, is meant to demonstrate a series of activities and practices in each of those different country contexts. So in Mali, for example, the Mali team was very focused, or had a particular focus on restoration of unproductive land. So being able to restore land to greater productivity. In Ghana, the team had a greater focus on dry season agriculture and enhancing women small-scale farmers' ability to conduct dry season agriculture and grow things like tomatoes and peppers as cash crops. In Malawi, the team was focused on connecting to broader water resources management practices, such as producing trees that were then sold to the Department or the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, as a way to protect watersheds at scale. Some of the impacts of these programs, first, an increase in quantity and quality of yields. So the kind of first objective of water smart agriculture is to be able to increase yields or sustain yields in times of water scarcity. So all of these programs saw an increase both in the quantity and quality of yields of staple crops as well as cash crops. An increase in incomes. We saw this this was a big impact of the program. Women's annual incomes were increased anywhere from 15% to 400%, particularly in areas where women engaged in dry season farming of cash crops. This really contributed to an increase in annual income. But it also increased their annual income as far as normal staple crops. Another impact was increased resilience of crops to dry spells. So again, greater soil moisture capacity or holding capacity helped fields, staple crops be able to weather dry spells in the middle of the rainy season. And then in Mali in particular, but we saw this more broadly, one of the impacts was restoration of unproductive land over a series of years. So in Mali, women restored land using water smart agriculture practices over a series of 3 to 5 years under the condition that they would be able to use that land. So restoration of unproductive land in the Mali case increased women's access to land, as women don't always have control over land and long-term tenure. So in this case, that restoration really contributed to increasing women's control of land. So that's just a practical example. There's many more examples and resources of this. Again, I want to underline that Water Smart Agriculture is not meant to be a standalone program, but really meant to be an approach within our broader food security and resilience work. And in particular, our work with small scale farmers, including as part of our farmer field and business schools approach. Here is where you can find more resources. You can find those on our Water Plus page, a few resources there. We also have a public folder in our Water Team SharePoint that is some of our introductory WaSA resources, but we have many more resources. Please do contact us if you want them. Kelly Alexander on the Water Team, as well as myself, but also other members of the FWS team, including Peter Wright, who's the Senior Advisor for Climate Smart Agriculture, Heather DeLong, who's the Technical Advisor for Sustainable Agriculture on the Ag and Markets team. And soon we'll have a Senior Water Smart Agriculture Advisor join our team and be able to provide technical assistance to our food security programs more broadly. So thanks for your attention. Let us know if you have any comments, questions, or need more resources.